In August 1943, on a Japanese-held island chain in the Solomon Sea, 2 island scouts paddled through enemy waters carrying a rescue message scratched into the green skin of a coconut. A few days earlier, a Japanese destroyer had torn an American patrol boat in half. 11 survivors were stranded among reefs, jungle, and hostile patrols. They had no radio. Fresh water was scarce. Some of the men were injured, and the coconuts they ate had already made several of them sick. Then Byuku Gasa and Ironi Kumana found them. When the young Lieutenant John F. Kennedy needed a way to send a message, Gasa showed him what the island already provided. A hard green fruit became paper. A knife became a pen. The coconut crossed the water. The message reached Allied forces, and the men were rescued. Years later, that shell sat on Kennedy's desk in the Oval Office, sealed inside a paperweight. A tropical fruit had moved from an island beach to the center of American power. Today, the coconut sits quietly in supermarket aisles. Its water is sold in cartons. Its milk thickens curry. Its oil appears in jars, shampoo, soap, candy, cosmetics, and factory ingredients most shoppers never notice. Its shell becomes charcoal. Its husk becomes rope, brushes, mats, and growing material. It looks like a lifestyle product, a beach symbol, or a health trend. But the coconut is older and stranger than that. It is a seed built like a survival capsule. It can carry water, fat, fiber, fuel, and a future tree inside one floating body. Humans used it to cross oceans, build boats, mark ceremonies, feed families, claim land, make alcohol, light homes, manufacture soap, and create colonial fortunes. The same fruit that helped people settle islands would later help foreign companies control them. So how did a drifting seed become one of history's most complete technologies? And why did the fruit known as the Tree of Life eventually become a machine for empire? If you like stories where ordinary food turns into empire, trade, obsession, and hidden history, subscribe to Food Empire History. Now, to understand how coconut became this powerful, we have to go back to where the story really begins. The coconut did not begin as the neat brown sphere stacked beside pineapples in a Western grocery store. That is only the inner core. On the palm, a mature fruit is wrapped in a thick outer husk filled with tough fibers and pockets of air. Beneath that sits the hard shell with 3 soft pores, the marks that later reminded Iberian sailors of a face. Inside the shell is the white flesh, and in the center is the liquid that nourishes the developing seed. Botanically, it is not a true nut, but a large drupe, related in structure to fruits such as peaches, although almost nothing about it feels delicate. The husk cushions impact. The fibers resist salt water. The shell protects the seed. The stored food inside can keep an embryo alive until it reaches a shore where roots can take hold. For generations, scholars argued over where the coconut first came from because humans had carried it so widely that its natural map had almost disappeared. Modern genetics revealed a more complicated answer. Cultivated coconuts carry 2 major family histories. One developed around island Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific. The other formed around the southern edge of the Indian subcontinent. The fruit did not have one simple birthplace and one clean journey. It had at least 2 great human partnerships. In the Pacific world, people selected coconuts that were better for people than for drifting. Rounder fruits carried more water and white flesh. Thinner husks made them easier to open. Some palms grew shorter and produced sooner. Those changes improved the fruit as food, but weakened the design that had helped its wild ancestors survive long ocean voyages. That is the first paradox of the coconut. The fruit is famous for floating, yet the coconut that conquered the Pacific did not simply arrive everywhere by accident. People carried it. Austronesian voyagers loaded living plants, seed nuts, tools, animals, and knowledge into ocean-going canoes. A coconut was not just a snack for the crossing, it was a promise that drinking water, cooking fat, cordage, roofing, containers, and fuel could exist on the island ahead. Then, around the 19th century, the coconut changed identity almost overnight. European factories stopped seeing a complete tree of life and began seeing one industrial substance hidden inside it. The white flesh could be cut out, dried, packed into sacks, shipped across oceans, and crushed for oil. Dried coconut meat was called copra. It did not spoil as quickly as fresh fruit, and that solved the problem that had kept coconut wealth close to the tropics. A perishable island food had become a durable global commodity. In European ports, copra disappeared into presses. Oil ran into barrels. It hardened well, produced a firm soap, lathered even in salty water, and later entered margarine, candles, confectionery, lubricants, cosmetics, and chemical manufacturing. Suddenly, every palm grove could be measured in export weight. Every island beach could be entered into a ledger. Every family tree could be converted into a price. The coconut had spent thousands of years helping humans survive the ocean. Now the ocean carried it toward factories that would turn survival into profit. And once the price rose, merchants, companies, and governments began fighting over who controlled the shore. Before that industrial transformation, coconut power had remained intimate. A family could drink the young water, grate the mature flesh, squeeze it into milk, boil or press it for oil, burn the shell, weave the leaves, and twist the husk into coir. Even the flower stalk could be tapped. Its sweet sap could be consumed fresh, boiled into sugar, fermented into toddy, soured into vinegar, or distilled into stronger alcohol. Few plants offered so many products without needing to be killed. A palm could continue producing year after year, dropping fruit through different seasons. That made it valuable on small islands where soil was thin, fresh water uncertain, and cargo space limited. The coconut was not merely calories, it was infrastructure growing from the ground. Its fibers helped hold the maritime world together. Along parts of the Indian Ocean, boat builders stitched wooden planks with coir rope instead of fastening them with metal. The rope flexed with the hull and tolerated salt water. Roofs were tied with it. Nets, lines, mats, baskets, brushes, and cables emerged from what another fruit would have discarded as waste. The palm also entered systems of meaning. Across South Asia, coconuts became offerings in ceremonies and temples, objects associated with auspicious beginnings, purity, prosperity, and surrender. In many Pacific communities, palms were connected to family land, inheritance, food security, and identity. Planting a coconut could be a practical act, but it could also mark a relationship between people and place that might last longer than one human life. That made the later colonial transformation especially invasive. Foreign traders often looked at a grove and saw unused capacity. Islanders saw food, shade, rope, drink, building material, customary rights, and independence. The same tree could represent wealth to both sides, but they did not define wealth in the same way. Long before European empires industrialized the fruit, coconut roots already stretched across enormous distances. Pacific coconuts followed Austronesian settlement eastward through island worlds and westward into the Indian Ocean. Their genetic signature reached Madagascar, where people with Southeast Asian ancestry created one of history's most remarkable migration stories. Indo-Atlantic coconuts moved around South Asia, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, East Africa, and Indian Ocean ports. Later, Portuguese and Spanish expansion pushed the fruit into new colonial circuits. Iberian sailors called it cocoa, a word linked to a frightening face or mask because the shell's 3 marks seemed to stare back at them. Portuguese networks moved coconuts around the Atlantic. Spanish ships carried Pacific varieties from the Philippines toward Mexico across the Manila galleon route. The fruit's DNA still preserves those voyages. Coconuts on opposite coasts of the Americas can reveal different histories, one connected to the Indo-Atlantic world, another to the Pacific. The palm became a living archive. Long after ships rotted empires vanished and port records faded, the trees continued carrying evidence of who had moved them. But trade was not yet empire. For that, buyers needed predictable quantities, standardized drying, cheap labor, secure land, and governments willing to protect commercial claims. By the second half of the 19th century, European demand for vegetable oils was rising. Soap manufacturing expanded. Margarine factories wanted fats that could be processed into stable, affordable products. Copra prices climbed, and in parts of Southeast Asia and the Pacific, coconuts earned a new name, green gold. The phrase sounded hopeful. For some farmers and island traders, copra did provide cash, imported goods, and bargaining power. A household could harvest nuts, split them, dry the flesh in the sun or over smoke, and sell the result to a merchant. But green gold also attracted outsiders who wanted plantations rather than independent producers. Samoa became one of the clearest examples. American, German, and British interests competed for influence in islands whose harbors and coconut trade had become strategically valuable. Entrepreneurs chasing copra profits pressed officials and naval officers for protection. Commercial rivalry became political rivalry. By the end of the 19th century, foreign powers were not merely purchasing sacks of dried coconut. They were helping divide an island world. After Germany formally took control of Western Samoa, colonial officials and plantation owners tried to reshape labor around export agriculture. Samoans often resisted plantation wage work because village agriculture gave them greater control over land, time, and food. From the colonial point of view, that independence was described as a labor problem. The solution was imported workers and stricter discipline. Thousands of Melanesian and Chinese laborers entered plantation systems across the Pacific, often under contracts that placed enormous power in the hands of employers and overseers. Work began before the heat thickened. Nuts had to be gathered, split, carried, dried, bagged, and loaded. Plantation routines measured bodies by output, while colonial racial categories decided who could command, who had to obey, and whose complaint would be believed. Workers did not simply accept that system. They slowed work, kept food for themselves, escaped, shared information, appealed to officials, organized and exposed abuse. Their resistance matters because colonial coconut history was never only a story of European companies acting on passive islands. Local communities and migrant laborers constantly negotiated, refused, adapted, and fought to retain control over their lives. This is where the image of the peaceful coconut beach begins to crack. The palms remained beautiful. The ocean still flashed blue beyond the groves, but beneath that postcard landscape sat land disputes, coercive contracts, racial hierarchy, corporal punishment, and a global market that rewarded the cheapest possible oil. The people who bought soap in Europe rarely saw any of this. They saw a clean bar wrapped in paper. That separation became one of industrial capitalism's greatest tricks. The product became smoother as the supply chain became harder to see. Technology deepened the disguise. Traditional coconut oil could be made from fresh flesh or by heating coconut milk, but the industrial system favored copra because it could be stored and shipped. At mills, dried kernels were crushed and pressed. The crude oil could then be refined, bleached and deodorized until much of its smell, color and island identity disappeared. Chemical processing widened the market. Manufacturers learned to blend and harden vegetable fats for margarine and shortening. Bakers gained a stable fat. Confectioners gained texture. Soap companies gained a reliable ingredient. Factories no longer needed the consumer to love coconut flavor. They only needed the chemistry to perform. That was the second great conquest of the coconut. First, people carried the whole fruit because every part was useful. Then industry separated it into invisible functions: oil for soap, fat for filling, fiber for mats, shell for charcoal, carbon for filters, fatty acids for detergents and cosmetics. The tree of life became a catalogue of inputs. Large firms grew by mastering that separation. Their advertisements sold cleanliness, modern kitchens, bright clothing, healthy families, and convenience. Faraway plantation workers dried flesh beside smoke and heat. Between them stood ships, brokers, mills, laboratories, packaging lines, and brands powerful enough to make the tropical origin almost irrelevant to the buyer. The coconut also became entangled with war. Pacific islands covered in coconut groves became battlefields, airstrips, supply bases, and contested sea lanes during the Second World War. Palms that had once guided settlement now stood around wrecked ships and military camps. Coconut water, flesh, timber, leaves, and shells returned to their oldest role, helping people improvise when formal systems failed. That is why the rescue message from 1943 carries more meaning than a strange presidential souvenir. Kennedy did not invent the coconut's usefulness. Garza and Cumana applied island knowledge in a moment when radios, engines, and military power had broken down. The most advanced war on Earth was briefly forced to depend on a technology refined by tropical communities over thousands of years, a sharp blade, a floating seed, and men who knew how to move safely through their own waters. The shell later reached the Oval Office, but the knowledge that made it useful came from the Solomon Islands. That distinction is easy to lose when history turns one object into one famous man's legend. After the war, coconut production expanded through new mills, roads, ports, packaging, and consumer markets. Desiccated coconut entered bakeries. Canned coconut milk traveled beyond tropical kitchens. Refined oil moved through food plants and chemical factories. Coir found new markets in mattresses, erosion control, horticulture, and car interiors. Activated carbon made from shells entered filtration systems. Coconut water, once consumed directly from a young fruit, eventually became a global branded drink. Every new product promised more value. But value did not always return to the people growing the palms. Much of the modern coconut economy still depends on smallholders in Indonesia, the Philippines, India, Sri Lanka, and other tropical countries. Many farmers work with aging trees, low yields, volatile prices, fragmented land, costly transport, and limited access to processing. The raw nut is bulky and relatively cheap. The branded products made from it can be light, fashionable, and expensive. A farmer may sell whole nuts or copra at the beginning of the chain, while companies farther away capture more profit by selling virgin oil, bottled water, cosmetics, protein powders, snacks, charcoal, or premium fiber products. The old colonial pattern has not survived unchanged, but its basic question remains: who controls the transformation? The person who grows the tree, the trader who buys the harvest, the mill that extracts the oil, or the brand that tells consumers what the coconut means. In the 21st century, that meaning changed again. Coconut oil was reborn in wealthy markets as a natural cure-all, beauty treatment, fitness fat, and superfood. Social media turned a traditional ingredient into a badge of clean living. Yet coconut oil remains rich in saturated fat. Major health authorities do not treat it as a miracle and generally recommend that saturated fats be limited or replaced with more unsaturated fats. That does not make coconut evil, it makes the modern story familiar. Industry first removed the coconut's identity so it could hide inside mass products. Marketing later restored an idealized identity so it could be sold at a premium. In one era, the fruit was useful because consumers could not see it. In another, it was valuable because the label displayed it in large letters. Meanwhile, the palms themselves face pressure. Many productive groves are old. Replanting takes years before new trees bear heavily. Typhoons, drought, extreme rainfall, pests, and disease can damage harvests across entire regions. Demand for young coconut water can also pull fruit away before it matures into copra. When supply tightens, the effects travel from village traders to cooking oil markets, soap makers, food factories, and beauty brands. The coconut seems permanent because the palm is one of the most recognizable silhouettes on Earth. But a landscape full of old trees can conceal a fragile future. The market wants more products, faster harvests, uniform quality, and lower prices. The biology of the palm works on a slower clock. That tension reaches all the way back to domestication. Humans once selected coconuts for more flesh, more water, easier opening, and earlier production. Colonial planters selected landscapes for export. Modern companies select product forms for convenience and branding. At every stage, the coconut becomes better at serving a human system, while becoming more dependent on that system for survival. Walk into a supermarket now, and the entire history is separated into aisles. Coconut water stands near sports drinks. Coconut milk sits beside curry pastes. Oil appears in cooking and beauty sections. Sweet flakes wait in baking bags. Shampoo lists coconut-derived ingredients in chemical language. Coir may be holding moisture around a houseplant. Shell carbon may be filtering water without any visible connection to a palm. The original fruit performed all those functions at once. Modern industry broke it apart, packaged each function, and sold the pieces back to us. That is why the coconut is more than an ingredient. It is one of humanity's oldest examples of total design. The outer fiber protects and ties. The shell stores and burns. The water refreshes. The flesh feeds. The oil cooks, lights, cleans, preserves, and manufactures. The sap sweetens and ferments. The leaves cover roofs. The trunk becomes timber. Even after industrial processing, almost every layer can enter another market. But total usefulness attracts total control. The more purposes a thing serves, the more people compete to own its land, labor, movement, and meaning. The coconut fed voyagers, then enriched merchants. It supported island independence, then invited plantation discipline. It carried indigenous knowledge, then became a colonial export. It disappeared into soap and margarine, then returned as a luxury wellness symbol. And still, the simplest experience has barely changed. A blade strikes the husk, fibers tear away, the shell cracks, clear liquid moves inside a chamber built by the seed itself. White flesh clings to the wall, storing the energy for a tree that may rise above a coast decades after the person who planted it is gone. That sound contains an ocean crossing. It contains stitched boats and temple offerings, village groves and plantation ledgers, migrant workers and factory presses, wartime islands and supermarket brands. It contains a rescue message carried through enemy waters by men who understood that a coconut was never just something to eat. The coconut looks ordinary because history succeeded in making its miracles cheap. But inside that rough shell is a survival capsule, a map of migration, an industrial raw material, and a record of who gained power from the tropical world. The next time you hold one, remember that you are not holding a nut. You are holding a vessel that humans taught to cross borders, feed machines, build fortunes, and carry life from one shore to another. If this story changed the way you see coconut, subscribe for more hidden food history.